know. Thank you very much.
Oh, yes. Okay, so I would like to introduce Matt first. He has been living China this year. He's a psychologist, but he's also a counselor 1 day a week. So he does a lot of different types of groups. He works with kids individually. He works with myself and Stacy. He also works in classrooms with teachers. So he is all over the place. He's out at recess. So he's just been an amazing resource, I think, for a lot of people, and we're really lucky to have him.
Yeah, looking forward to having more time here next year.
Yay!
The topic I was going to talk about tonight was working with sensitive children, and there's a few different ways to sort of think about that or interpret that, and I decided that what I would focus on was working with children who are experiencing anxiety. And part of the reason I selected that was that I feel like anxiety is a particularly prevalent issue at our school because our students are working in an advanced curriculum. It's very difficult. I think, having experience in a number of different schools across the district, that sort of performance anxiety and that sort of pressure is more prevalent here. And so I thought it would be a good idea to sort of just talk about that. And there's certainly other issues that relate to working with sensitive children, and talk about those perhaps another night. Okay? As all good talks do, I'll start with an anecdote. So when I was a kid, my father was talking to me and started sort of rambling, sort of apropos of nothing, so far as I could tell at the time, about how he often felt that sometimes he had a problem, but that if he could solve his problem that was standing in his way, that he often sort of felt like, well, in that case, I can get past this problem, get past this anxiety, sort of stop worrying and sort of get back to the business of life. But often after he solved his problem, he said, he would often just encounter another problem. And again, he would sort of reflexively think to himself, well, okay, if I can just get past this problem, I'm good. I can sort of get to that open, clear field. But he also sort of told me that he comes to realize that the sort of free and clear space that seems to be waiting for him just sort of over the edge of that next problem never seems to really materialize. There's always another problem to solve. And that brought to mind for me at the time an anecdote about Bertrand Russell, 20th century philosopher. I was into philosophy even as a kid. And in that anecdote, Bertrand Russell was giving a popular speech on astronomy, and he was describing to the audience how the planets and the stars float about space, and how Earth orbits the sun as a function of gravity, velocity, and all this business, when sort of an elderly, cantankerous woman in the audience challenged him, and she told him that his account was rubbish, and that the reason the Earth didn't fall out of the sky was that it rested on the back of a giant turtle. So Bertrand Russell thought he had this one, and so I answered with an obvious response, which was, well, in that case, what's under the turtle? What's holding up that turtle? And the older lady said, well, you're a very clever young man, but his turtle is all the way down. And in a sense, I thought at the moment that it's also sort of problems all the way down. And that may seem like a somewhat sort of pessimistic view of things, but I really sort of mean that in a very sort of life-affirming and positive way. And it's actually a message that I try to impart to the anxious students that I work with here at Lincoln, which is basically that we all do have problems, and the problems and anxiety are unavoidable aspects of life. And I think this really is a very important message, both for children and adults to hear and to integrate. Stephen Hayes is a psychologist who developed a method for treating anxiety called acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT for short. And he distinguishes between two kinds of anxiety, clean anxiety and dirty anxiety. So clean anxiety is sort of the anxiety that just sort of naturally arises when we have a problem. And dirty anxiety is sort of the second order anxiety that arises from reacting to and sort of being unable to tolerate that first presentation of anxiety. So whereas we might feel anxious about, say, an upcoming job interview, or hypothetically giving a talk before a local PTA, it's also possible to then become sort of acutely conscious of the fact that you're feeling anxious, and to interpret this as sort of a sign of danger. and develop thoughts like, this is horrible, I shouldn't be feeling this way, I've got to escape this feeling. And this second order, dirty anxiety, is sort of the beginning of the cycle of anxiety, of intense anxiety that truly seems sort of most intolerable and really results in the most sort of intense and significant distress for adults and for children. So I think it is really very adaptive and preventative of suffering and helps us sort of attenuate our reactions to anxiety, to learn early on that problems are a normal, recurring part of life as is the anxiety that comes with it. So often when I'm speaking with teachers and with parents about having problem behaviors that we'd like to see stop, I bring up the idea of replacement behaviors. It's very natural when a child is doing something we don't want them to do, like screaming or hitting, to just want it to stop, and to look for ways to make that happen. But to simply extinguish a behavior, though, in the language of school psychology, isn't usually as easy or fruitful as we might like. Behaviors typically have functions, which is to say that the child is behaving in that way to achieve something that they need or that they want. So simply to extinguish the behavior that is getting them something that they need or they want probably isn't going to be a total solution, because unless there's something to replace replacement behavior, it's likely that another problem behavior is going to arise to meet the need or the want that the previous problem behavior was addressing. So if a child is hitting in order to get attention or express anger or get help, just extinguishing the hitting isn't likely to improve things. The child is likely to then move on to, say, yelling, or stealing, or being sneaky, or being defiant. So rather than extinguishing the hitting, what we want to do is replace it with a more pro-social behavior that can meet the child's needs and wants in a positive way. So I'm mentioning this concept of replacement behaviors because naturally there are problem behaviors associated with anxiety, and we need to know how to replace them if we're going to improve how our students cope and handle anxiety. So one of the main problems that we come up against in anxious children is negative self-talk. And this relates back to the concept of clean and dirty anxiety. So negative self-talk is often referred to in cognitive behavioral therapy, which is a research-based approach to dealing with anxiety and depression. It's also called CBT. Negative self-talk is often referred to in CBT as thinking errors or thinking traps. And so here's sort of a list of some of the common thinking errors or traps. Okay, that's not good. Thinking errors. But I can read them to you as well. And some of these are taken from what's called the Coping Cat curriculum, which is sort of a CBT curriculum adapted for children. And some of them are mine. But these are some thinking errors that are common for children having really problematic self-talk. The first, sorry, that's not really readable, is walking with blinders, which is, not thinking about all of the good things that could happen, only the bad things. The pessimist, expecting things to always turn out badly. Pick, which is picking out the negatives in a situation, sort of exclusively. The avoider, avoiding things that make you nervous. Quick and dirty, which is jumping to conclusions before getting the facts. Mind reading, reading minds and assuming others are thinking bad things. The shoulds, I should always get my homework done without feeling nervous. The perfectionist, anyone know any of those? Cannot make mistakes. The foreverist, it's always going to be like this. So, here the goal is to replace these thinking traps or negative self-talk with coping thoughts. And one of the first and most helpful steps to take in doing this is to help the student understand that there are actually different ways of thinking about our problems or our feelings. And this might seem very obvious to us, but when we're in the grip of a scary problem, and this is especially true for children, it really isn't that obvious that there are other ways to think about things. So this is a very basic starting point that kids need to be taught when they're dealing with anxiety, that there are, in fact, different ways to think about problems, and some of them are more helpful than others. So anxious thinking often arises from exaggerated estimates of how bad something is going to turn out, or from a sense of lack of control about how things are going to turn out. So the first replacement behavior that we want to sort of think about